When a charity receives charitable status, then there are certain privileges that they're provided with that are somewhat different than nonprofit status. Now, the first one is they have the exemption from paying income tax, which is the same as a nonprofit status. But the other two are significantly different. Once a charity is registered, they have the ability to issue tax receipts for their gifts that they receive. And this way, the donor can offset some of their taxable income, either individually or for corporate donors. A registered charity also has the ability to receive funding from other registered charities. This is what they call, they now have the status of being a qualified donee. And this is really critical because often an organization can't receive funding unless they are a qualified donee. With these privileges comes certain responsibilities. There are basically three major responsibilities that a charity has. They need to demonstrate that they're devoting a substantial part of their resources to their charitable purposes or activities. They need to file the 3010 information return on time. This is an annual return that needs to be completed and accurately. And they need to carry out any other obligations that are identified in the Income Tax Act. So for example, if I change my bylaws or constitution, then I need to forward that to CRA that my governance documents have now been changed. So these are now expectations of me as a charity to maintain my charitable status. There are certain tools that CRA uses to help charities with compliance to their expectations. Basically, there are four main tools that CRA uses. The first tool is called education. They're assuming that often charities might not be aware or maybe misinterpret some of the guidelines that are there, and so often if there is some confusion, then CRA will try and clarify that confusion with the charity. This might even result in what they call an education letter, which really explains the rule to the charity, and then it's expected that the charity will conform to that. This is by far the greatest percentage of interactions with Revenue Canada are what they call from an educational perspective. Something that's a little more restrictive is something called a compliance agreement. In this situation, a charity and CRA will have some discussion about some issue that is a problem, and there'll be a compliance agreement that will be set up. And basically, the agreement identifies the problem, the steps that a charity needs to take place to address the problem, the potential consequences of that, and so this now becomes the guideline under which the charity will now address the issues that has been identified. If in fact that doesn't occur, then a charity can be placed under some sanction. Now we're really getting into financial penalties or some kind of even suspension of your charitable status. Once that suspension occurs, then for example the charity might not be able to issue tax receipts for a period of time until that suspension is lifted. And then the final thing is that there's something called revocation, in which the charitable status is actually removed from the charity. As a general rule, then we have education first, and then we progress to more serious sanctions. CRA has organized information that relates to these sanctions and penalties. On your screen you can see a couple of examples. Late filing of the annual information return. The first infraction is a $500 penalty, and repeat infractions are again $500 penalties. Issuing receipts with incomplete information, then we're looking at a 5% penalty, and then it escalates to 10%. So they've got a chart that identifies the different elements that could be problematic, and then also the specific sanction or penalty that might occur. We also have an info sheet that we put together around the monitoring of charities that identifies all of these elements and steps in more detail. The impact of non-compliance, really, the revocation of charitable status is, the final step that can occur. Once that occurs, then basically the charity is unable to issue tax receipts. They've lost the status of being a qualified donee, therefore they can't receive funds from other charitable organizations, and they are no longer tax exempt. One of the real critical issues here is that there's a degree of public embarrassment when this occurs, and the loss of reputation of the organization. If you are providing services for clients, then in fact that puts those services at risk. Given the nature of the environment where there's a lot of charities asking for donations, and if you've kind of lost the confidence of the public in your ability to provide consistent services, then that's a significant challenge to your sustainability. The final issue is really around hurting the credibility of the sector. There are very few organizations that have their status revocated because of just cause, but those stories often hit the paper, and they really do impact on the credibility of the sector. CRA really wants to make sure that charities are aware of the challenges that might exist and comply to those standards, and so that the sector stays as strong as it